Hello everyone. I am currently in the process of filming a review of a wonderful product. I thought it best to apply foundation, concealer, setting powder as well as draw in eyebrows prior to filming my review in order to expedite the process. However, I felt like creating a very quick technique-based tutorial. I then get to create 2 films out of 1 look, 2 for the price of 1. I do tend to find that most things are better when they come as a pair, unless of course it's boils or bills. I'm sure for my regular viewers, the application methods that I use are quite familiar. I would like to elaborate on the philosophy that I have when it comes to applying complexion products, and I would also like to demonstrate the methods that I use. And within today's film, I am going to be focusing more on liquid and cream products. Powder foundation is a separate matter, and I will touch on that another time. I am going to be applying color corrector as well as liquid foundation and setting powder. I began first of all by applying the Banish Fighter Gel to clean shaven skin across my jaw area as well as other areas of the face, mainly a little bit on the eyebrows. And I find this to be a fantastic product at simply calming down post-shave razor blade inflammation. I find this product to be great against a multitude of inflammations. I use it to combat the inflammation that I get from shaving. I'm a little hesitant to say this as I know that there are going to be so many men who will die inside when I say this. I shave against the grain. Because I'm a rock star, and to hydrate and give my skin a good bit of moisture before going in with foundation, I went in with a classic go-to of mine, Embryolisse La Cream Concentrate. I shall first of all go in with colour corrector underneath my eyes to brighten and just to knock back some of the blue that is there. I shall be taking some of Kryolan's Dermacolor Cream Concealer in the shade D1W, and I'm just applying it to the under eye area first of all. And I also like to cut. Not necessarily for a lift. What this does, it just pushes back the bit of discoloration that I get there, which can sometimes make the eyes really drag down. I'm not applying the corrector in any particular way, I'm just getting the product on first of all. And then I'm taking a little bit of it on the chin just to conceal and knock back any potential 5 o'clock shadow. I don't get 5 o'clock shadow, I never have. I think I just imagine getting it, so live in crippling fear. Then I'm taking a Zova 227 soft definer brush. I'm picking brushes today for their effectiveness, not necessarily because it's a particular brand. The reason I'm taking this brush is because it's like a blending brush, but it's synthetic. Perhaps if you're new to the use of such a term in the context of brushes, synthetic means man-made fibers. Natural means that they are fibers, brush hairs, that are derived from an animal. I'm taking that brush and I'm just stippling the edges of it. When it comes to liquid or gel products, I do tend to favor synthetic fibered brushes over natural fibered brushes because they are not porous. Whereas brushes with natural fibers do tend to be more porous, so they absorb more product. Now I'm going to be taking a Furless CB2 brush, and this is what I would consider a buffing brush. It is quite a densely packed, so the fibers have been densely packed into the ferrule, so it feels quite stiff. Some of these types of brushes do feel a little bit looser, but this one feels quite stiff. Their density doesn't really matter all that much. They do tend to do the similar thing, and I'm using that just to diffuse the color corrector that I applied to the jaw area. And stippling is a wonderful way of just correcting the formation of a product without removing too much or adding more. And what stippling is just pressing the brush onto the skin. It's a wonderful way of just making products work and merge into the skin. I always find that stippling corrects the texture and the way that a product sits on the skin. Now that is the color corrector applied. I'm going to move on and apply foundation momentarily. I do tend to find that there is this sort of school of thought that makeup can't look flawless on skin, or that makeup is going to look cakey on skin, or to have largely diffused, perfect looking skin that you require either a filter or Photoshop. I would have to say I do not share this school of thought. I do think that you can make skin look really seamless, really flawless, diffuse texture, diffuse, if not hide, the appearance of pores. I have texture, I have pores, I have skin. But I do know that with a certain application technique that I can really make my skin look quite good, really perfected. It isn't necessarily what product that you use. It could be a cream concealer, it could be a liquid foundation, it could be a tinted moisturizer. It's the application technique, it's the technique that can really make skin look incredible. And the technique that I'm going to be demonstrating to you is the technique that I have used for years and years and years now, because it is the only way that I can hide pores on my nose. Some of my pores on my nose are a little deeper, but with this application technique, I know how to hide and conceal them completely and make the skin look flawless. Of course, everyone has different skin. It's a very individual thing, the skin. However, I do think that there are ways to apply makeup that can make your skin look really airbrushed without using too much product. The method that I'm also going to demonstrate will allow you to take whatever complexion product you're using, be it a very cakey foundation or a lighter foundation, and then when it is applied to the skin in a certain fashion, it can make the skin look really good. Even if you are somebody that has quite deep pores or has texture, this method will help. I would not say that it is a complete fix, this method. I may alter the application technique when I'm using a very matte foundation or a foundation that dries quite quickly, because with this technique I do tend to take the foundation and a brush and just slap it onto the skin. As I always say, slap it on and hope for the best. But with matte foundations you don't really have the same window time. With a foundation that requires powder or will set slowly, you can apply it on the skin first of all, wait a moment or so, and then go in and blur it and buff it and stipple it. However, with matte foundations, I will adapt application technique. Now you can use whatever liquid or cream foundation product that you like for this technique to work. For foundation, I'm going to be taking some of the Estee Lauder Double Wear Stay in Place makeup in the shade 0N1 Alabaster. I've applied some of that foundation to my metal dish. You can apply the foundation to the skin using your hands. I wouldn't recommend applying it with a sponge first of all, or a beauty blender. I tend not to use them at all. I don't find them practical. I don't find that sponges or beauty blenders really do the same thing as a buffing, blurring, blending, stippling brush. I'm going to be applying it first of all to the skin using a Tina Earnshaw No. 9 brush. Slap it on and hope for the best. The colour contrast between the foundation and my current facial skin will seem quite stark, so it will look as if though it's quite a lot, as I'm quite red as of late. And I just cover everything, and I would do this with a light formulation as well. I've applied a light to medium layer of the foundation all over the skin. You can of course use any foundation of your choice, be it a more high street option or a more high-end option. I picked Double Wear because the shade matches my skin tone and the foundation performs well for me. Going back in with our Furless CB2 brush, I then start to stipple the product into the skin. What this does, it just corrects the way that the product sits on the skin. And around the nose area where I have pores that are a little bit more exposed, I really buff the product into the nose. You will find that the product starts to sheer a little bit, but you can go back in with more foundation on top of it if you feel you need it. If I buff the foundation, it will start to sheer out a little bit, and you may get swirl lines, but it really just blends the product. And then we go in and stipple the product. If you were to think of the ends of my fingers to be the surface of the skin, but then the gaps to be the pores, what the buffing does, it just pushes a little bit, I know it sounds terrifying, but it just pushes a little bit of the product into those voids, which makes areas where there are pores and texture look quite flawless. Not absolutely perfect, of course, this is skin. I would find this method really effective at going over areas where I do have slightly deeper pores, because I would apply the foundation, but then I would have a small black dot, and it almost looks like a piercing scar. But the buffing cancels that out. It just makes everything look like one consistent tone. But buffing, of course, is disruptive, so by going in and stippling over what you have applied, it just almost recorrects the formation of the foundation. It makes it look like skin again. Buffing is almost like a polishing, but it will shear out the product. Stippling realigns it, puts it back into position and makes it look correct again. I absolutely love this method on me. I also love it on clients and models. I do not tend to apply foundation with a buffing brush though, unless I was stippling it on. If I went in and started buffing it around, it really eats up quite a lot of the product, and I do find it a little bit wasteful. And you may be thinking, couldn't I just use a sponge or a beauty blender? Of course you could, but a sponge or a beauty blender, you cannot buff with them in the same way that you can with a brush. I have buffed the product across my nose, and the buffing of course shears down the product, so I'm going to go back in with a little bit more foundation conceal the nose and other areas. And this time I am using the buffing brush to apply the product, but I'm just stippling it on first of all. And stippling foundation on, it does give you quite a full coverage, but again, you can always buff it to sheer it out and then stipple it just to get it back into formation. With the likes of keloid scars, acne scars, raised scars, it isn't as easy to conceal or hide these things with makeup. However, this method applied to the skin, I do tend to find it creates flawless looking makeup. It makes the makeup look flawless and really good. Before I go in and apply powder, I am just going to go in and add a little bit more concealer just along the nose and a little bit underneath the eye, as I don't feel I've gotten enough coverage from the foundation. For concealer, I'm going to be taking some of the Maclean Dermacolor Cream Concealer in the shade D707. Looking at the skin now, I can see that there are certain areas that require just a little bit more coverage. So I'm going to be going in with concealer. For concealer, I'm going to be taking some of the Maclean's Dermacolor Cream Concealer in the shade D707. And I'm applying that concealer on an Urban Decay flat brush, first of all. Pat, but pulling motions. Not pulling too much, not pulling like that, just patting it on. And I'm just applying a little bit of that to the underneath of the eye. Yes, a little bit of blueness is showing through. Now, to adjust the concealer that I've applied, I shall be taking a Furless CB1 brush. It is very similar in design to our buffing brush from before, however, of course, much smaller. And if you are looking for a similar brush, the Zova 142 Concealer Buffer is very similar in design, as is the Anastasia Beverly Hills A6 brush. As much as I love the Estee Lauder Double Wear Foundation and many Estee Lauder products, I find that ever since Double Wear was reformulated, I think about 10 years ago, in around 2012, 2013, there was quite a noticeable change in its formulation, and since that point, I have noticed that newer versions of Double Wear never quite cling to my nose, the same way as the previous edition did. But overall, a fantastic foundation, and on me personally, it is one of my favorites. Now with this concealer, I am not buffing it in any way, I'm not using circular motions, I am simply stippling it and pressing it, because I want to correct its texture and blur its edges, but I don't want to buff it into the skin, because if we buff it into the skin, it shall sheer out. And I'm applying some more of the D707. You can use any concealer of your choice, and I'm just stippling it onto the areas that I feel need just a little bit more coverage. And I would always recommend one of these very magnified mirrors. This is the Revlon one. It is a wonderful way of being able to see up close, not only what you're doing, but what you have done. And you really can see everything in these very magnified mirrors. You can see the devil himself in these mirrors. Now at this point, the foundation can look quite light, a bit too light for the skin. Powder is what will change that. The Double Wear does settle a little bit on the skin, but I tend to find that on me, it requires powder. And also, when trying to make skin look quite flawless, by itself using this method with stippling and buffing of product, when the foundation is more on the full coverage side of things, I really feel like you do need powder, but not too much of it. I think the trick to this is to not use too much, because I've used quite a good bit of foundation today. If I put heavy powder on now, the skin will just start to look a little bit like clay, and you will notice this particularly on the very fairest of skin tones like my own. Not so much as the skin darkens, you won't notice it as much, it's not as apparent, whereas on my skin, you can see it a mile away. When you apply too much powder onto concealer and foundation, I do tend to find that the product almost starts to crack. Not cracks and lines, it's almost as if the products shatter, and you can see very closely, if you look really closely in a magnified mirror, you can almost see your own natural skin through these tiny little cracks. So on me personally and within my work, I do not like to apply more powder than what is necessary. Now to set the foundation and to mattify the skin, as well as lock in a foundation and powder, I'm going to be using loose powder. You can use any loose powder or pressed powder of your choice. To powder, I shall be utilizing the Inglot Mattifying Loose Powder. This one is transparent. And I take the powder on the brush like so. Using the lid and the back of the lid, I shake off the excess and I just press. And I'm applying this powder to the skin with a Real Techniques blush brush. Again, I like to stipple. If I went in and started brushing on the powder like so, it really just disturbs and messes around the formation of the foundation that I have applied. And of course we've applied the foundation in such a methodical way that when you brush around with powder, some parts will set, others will not. The powder needs to be pressed onto the skin, especially in the areas where one is trying to diffuse the appearance of texture or pores. Brushing powder over it will not do that. By applying powder and pressing it on, not too much, will mattify the skin and set all those products in place, but also blur everything. And you can always just feel around. I simply powder to dry. And one little quick thing that I do before setting underneath the eyes, I go back in with our buffing brush from before, and I just stipple underneath the eye and buff just from side to side, just ever so slightly. If you've applied concealer or foundation to the under eye area, before going in and setting it, the products can accumulate into one's finer lines. So by just buffing it through and then stippling it, it just pushes the products back into formation. And on a Zova 228 crease brush, I just take some of our loose setting powder from before and press it into the under eye area. Hardly any of it though. Enough to set and to mattify the area. It may very well still accumulate in your finer lines. By setting it in this fashion, especially the area where you may get an accumulation of the products into the finer lines, by going in with the powder and setting it, it slows down the time at which the products will settle into your finer lines. But only enough powder to set and to mattify, as I tend to find that too much powder does make skin look caked. With the powder all applied to the skin and everything set through, it is all dry to touch. And it is at this point that I would take the powder brush with hardly anything left on it, dusting off the remainder of the product on my hand. I then just brush over the face, really lightly. And this is simply to disperse any loose excess powder that is remaining on the skin. If you feel as if though you just need to take off a little bit more powder, you can also use tissue paper. But I quite like to use a polishing cloth. They are also washable, you don't throw them away, so you reduce wastage. And I just press it really lightly on the skin, almost like a cushion. And it's soft enough not to disturb the formation of the foundation that we have applied, but the fabric is coarse enough to lift off any loose powder that we have applied to the skin. Also, if you feel the look is looking a little bit too matte, you can use any setting spray of your choice, and many setting sprays can just add life back into the skin. Now, this sort of technique does work really well on light, medium, and full coverage foundations. It works very well with full coverage foundations. It doesn't work so fantastically with some of the more sheerer formulations, some tinted moisturizers, some light formulas. You may also struggle to get similar effects. Some of these products don't always work. It really depends on the product. But this sort of makeup, even though I have gone for a more heavier base, as well as a good powder, never powdering more than is necessary, never applying too much powder, just enough to set the foundation and the concealer in place and to mattify. But when I feel the skin, it doesn't feel overly dry. It just feels really smooth. And also I still have elasticity. Sometimes when you overpowder, the skin can feel so like concrete and almost hard to move. I still have movement and I still feel very comfortable. And the foundation and the powder feel quite light on the skin. Personally speaking, I do like to go for something that is more on the medium to fuller coverage side of things, as I do have quite a bit of discoloration in my own natural skin. This method I have found to be marvelous at just making skin look glorious and seamless. I think one of the most exciting challenges about makeup is that every formulation is different and every skin is different. So you're almost trying something new every single time. Some sheer formulations don't build up as well to a medium or full coverage. You can sometimes start to get problems with them if you apply too much of them. Whereas full coverage products, I tend to find will sheer down quite well if mixed with a little bit of primer or a little bit of moisturizer. You can really sheer them down. The technique of buffing and then stippling does tend to be my go-to application when dealing with skin, be it on myself or on clients and models. That is the technique that I tend to favor towards, as I just feel it makes skin look really flawless. So that more or less completes today's film, where I have demonstrated to you techniques that I'm favorable towards when dealing with complexion products. And I would invite you to try something new, to take a chance if you feel inspired to do so. Certainly with makeup, there are endless options. And I hope that you have found the tips, the techniques, the demonstrations, and the recommendations for which that I have made within today's film to be either interesting, useful, helpful, or beneficial. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and of course, take care. Bye!